Welcome back to In Your Neighborhood. I'm your host, Charlotte Brown, and on today's show, we've been talking all about nutrition with Amy Ritchie. Amy's a holistic nutritionist, and we were talking a little bit about diets before the break there, and I'm curious as to maybe 5 things that you think that everyone needs to start maybe eating more of.
Okay, so I'm going to start with kind of touching on what we just did with the carbohydrates.
Yes.
So I think that people need to eat more whole sources of carbohydrates and move away from the refined sources. So when I talk about refined, that can be anything that's been processed down to a flour essentially, and moving into the whole food versions of carbohydrates. So again, coming into sweet potato and even regular white potato and parsnip and carrot and fruit, and have those whole sources in the diet while sort of letting that fill the space that the refines may used to have in your diet. I think fresh herbs and spices are something that we're really lacking in our culture in both Canada and America. If you've traveled kind of anywhere else in the world, they incorporate so many fresh herbs and spices into all of their cooking. And herbs and spices have medicinal benefits that are really unique to each of them. And I often build that into my dietary protocols for people, is herbs and spices that are going to benefit their goals and conditions. An example of this can be cinnamon is really beneficial for balancing blood sugar. Basil and dill are really high in vitamin C, which is really great for immune health and for energy and for mood. So working in more herbs and spices in general is going to benefit most people. And sort of widening the palate and introducing some new flavors can make making new meals really kind of more interesting and exciting as well.
I think people think that eating healthy tastes terrible or isn't going to taste good, but it's things like that that really change that.
Yeah, I'm definitely not like a chicken breast and rice and steamed broccoli kind of girl, and my recipes and recommendations never sound like that. Again, I think that falls into something that you can do for a short period of time, but it gets boring. And if you're not enjoying the food you're eating, you're gonna go back to something that you remember being delicious.
Yes.
So if you go from having pizza all the time to, you know, chicken breasts, white rice and broccoli, and you're bored and not enjoying it, guess what you're going to go back to?
Right.
Where if we can create some meals that are delicious but kind of fit within promoting your best health, that's something that's going to be sustainable. So the herbs and spices, healthy fats, I think are really important. And you talked about the fact that we've heard all these different diets that are good for you, and there's been so many changes in the last few decades in what gets recommended.
Fat is not the enemy.
Yeah. We have learned now that fat is not the enemy. Low-fat diets can definitely contribute to lower mood. They can play with our hormones, they can cause dry skin, and they make us hungry. So I really think that people need to incorporate healthy sources of fats in their diet. So this can be things like nuts and seeds, avocado, coconut oil, avocado oil is great too, walnut oil, flax, chia, hemp. So all these great sources of fats that you can get into your diet, and taking out the lower quality sources. So these are going to be our processed and our fried foods, and bringing in the good quality sources will definitely make an impact. Seafood. Often I ask people how many times a week they eat seafood, and it'll be 0 is really common actually, or when we go out or when someone makes it. But there's many nutrients in seafood that you can't really find in high amounts in many other foods.
And when you say seafood, are you talking about fish as well as shellfish, you know, lobster, crab, shrimp, all that stuff?
Yes.
Okay.
All of it has really high amounts of different nutrients. Specific ones are going to be higher in different things. So when I'm talking about the omega-3 fats that we get from fish, salmon is going to be your best friend in that category. Trout's actually a pretty good source too. But all of the other seafood that you just mentioned does contain some sources of omega-3, and depending on what you're having, you're going to get in zinc and selenium and different minerals too. So getting that variety in your diet rather than just focusing on the one thing all the time. So at least 2 times a week, people should be getting some kind of seafood into their diet.
Great.
And the last one, I think green leafy vegetables is something that we don't see that much. And when we do use greens, it's often like romaine lettuce or iceberg lettuce, or kind of just a mixed green. So getting every meal of your day to incorporate something green. So that can be asparagus, broccoli, kale, Brussels sprouts, avocado. And if you're having trouble getting the greens into your diet, I recommend people get a greens powder that they can put into their smoothies or even just mix into water to make sure that they're getting that green in every day.
And I think for some people, it's looking at all those greens, so whether it be chard or kale, or what do you do with it? You know, people think like, oh, it's so bitter tasting, or any tips or tricks that way in terms of cooking or preparing or...
So I just want to touch on the bitter flavor for a second. It's kind of a flavor that we've sort of removed from our diets, and the most common source we get of it now is coffee, and we don't eat much else that is bitter. And there is this, I'm very fascinated in like the evolution behind why we crave different things and why our bodies respond different ways to foods. And the bitter taste is often caused by a chemical called alkaloids in plants that in some plants can be really dangerous for us. So we've sort of developed this reaction to dislike the taste of bitter, and that's sort of a survival mechanism. But there's so many benefits to the vegetables that are safe to eat that contain bitter. So kind of knowing that your body's reaction to the bitter taste, it makes sense. So now how can we adjust to incorporate more of those foods without having that sort of visceral, like, ugh, green veggie response? Getting some other flavors in there, so strong herbs and spices again. Sour can really be good to help cover some of that out, so squeezing some lemon juice onto your baked or sauteed greens can be really helpful. And the more that you start to incorporate these foods, your palate's going to change. Often we really just crave this sweet, salty, and kind of fat taste. So opening that up and getting more of those bitters and those astringents is going to change your palate, and the foods are going to be more appealing. But it sometimes takes a little bit of time and a little bit of creativity in your recipes to make it part of your everyday.
Absolutely. And I'd like to talk a little bit about the quality of food that we purchase. So especially when you're talking about things like vegetables, there's always conversations when it comes to, you know, should I buy organic, or, you know, do you buy things locally if you can get things locally and go to the farmer's market, in terms of buying your proteins and things like that. So people are worried about, you know, is there hormones in the beef or in chicken or that kind of stuff. Let's talk a little bit about that and some tips and ideas that you'd like to share.
So I'm definitely an advocate for quality over quantity when it comes to food. Sometimes we are hungry for more things because our body doesn't have the nutrition it needs, so it tells us to eat more. So buying higher quality food, and I'll go into detail about what that means, can sometimes make an impact on those cravings too. So the quality, when we're talking about organic, there's been a lot of controversy about it. But organic essentially means that things are grown without the use of chemical herbicides and pesticides that are used to keep off insects and to keep the plants sort of protected using chemicals though, which can have an effect on our health. So especially someone that's immunocompromised, meaning they have issues with their immune system, children and the elderly, these higher levels of chemicals are definitely an area of concern. Buying all organic can be expensive sometimes. So what I recommend is having a look online. Once a year, the Environmental Working Group releases a list called the Dirty Dozen. It's the top 12 fruits and vegetables that have the highest amounts of pesticides. So these are the ones that you really want to make the effort to buy organically. It also gives you a clean 15. So 15 fruits and vegetables that have lower levels of it. So these are less important. If you can buy everything organically, this is going to be the best decision that you can make. But if you need to consider budget in there a little bit, which most of us do, shopping with that Dirty Dozen, organic is going to be really important. Organic foods often do have higher levels of certain nutrients. The plant chemicals, again, we're always looking at sort of why things are the way they are. Plant chemicals can be protective for the plants. So when you start to give chemicals so that the plants no longer need to protect themselves, some of these amounts of chemicals go down, but these can be helpful for us as humans. So phytochemicals is what we refer to them as, which means plant chemicals. And a lot of these plant chemicals are antioxidants and these kind of buzzwords that you hear about the benefits of fruits and vegetables. And they'll be in higher amounts in things that are organically grown. It's definitely better for the environment. We'll focus our talk on health today, but that's something else that many people will be interested in. The local piece, one benefit to local is definitely that you're going to have something that's been more freshly picked and in season. So there's benefit to that as far as nutrients as well. Here in Thunder Bay, we have lots of really wonderful organic farmers. So speak to your farmers and ask them. Some of them don't have the certification, but they do practice organic growing. they just haven't gone forth and paid for that. It can be quite expensive. Right. So the farmers market is a great place to go and speak to people that are selling fruits and vegetables there. If you can get local and organic, you're doing pretty good for yourself.
And you can't beat the taste either.
Exactly. It always tastes better.
Awesome. Well, we're going to take another quick break and we're going to be back with Amy and talk more about nutrition.